All right, welcome. Those of you that don't know me, my name's Jason Murphy, and I teach at Against the Stream. And it's good to see you, those of you who are returning, and if there's any new people, welcome. And, you know, if we were live, we would spend some time kind of hearing from you, and it's actually a big part of what we do at Against the Stream. It's a huge part of Buddhism, this idea of kind of creating Sangha, building community. And but in this forum with Zoom, and because we record it on YouTube, it doesn't really work that well. So I hope for the days where we can meet in person and maybe do actually a combination of both, you know, making these teachings available continually online, even when we're back in, you know, the ability to meet in person. But welcome to all of those. If there's anyone new that wants to just kind of say hi in the chat, kind of pop it in, feel free. Also, if you have questions during the talk or during the time, feel free to write it in the chat if you don't want to speak up. There is a time where I'll open up for questions. But yeah, anyway. Let's see. So my thought is to practice some meditation, because that's what we do here. We sit in meditation and watch the mind and learn to perhaps befriend the mind. And I have kind of prepared a little bit of a talk, but I also thought I've been wanting to read this little teaching from the Buddha. That's a story for a while. So I think I'm going to do that tonight, and maybe I'll have time for both. But let's start by just arriving. So, yeah, so, you know, finding a posture that's workable, that's sustainable, where you can both be relaxed and alert. Yeah, we'll sit for about 30 minutes. If there's anyone that is new, if you actually could kind of raise your hand or just let me know, I can give some guidance. Okay, I'm not seeing any hands raised, so you're all veterans. Been around. So we're going to practice and meditate and, you know, focus on some here and now, present time experience. So it's helpful to allow the eyes to close or be downcast. And just kind of bringing that attention inward, opening to the comings and goings of sound. Sounds outside the room. Sounds inside the room. And seeing if we can allow sound to both be present. We're not trying to shut anything out, but perhaps be in the background of our attention. And aiming the attention more specifically at the sensations that we might be experiencing in the body. We're taking a few moments and just kind of checking in with this body. just acknowledging what's present, physical sensations. Is there some experiences of pleasant or unpleasant, neutral? And then taking a moment and really just kind of checking in with the mind. What's happening in here? Perhaps is there anything left over from the day? Any thoughts, any feelings, situations? Just kind of observing the mind or the mental habits. And then in some way, just like sound, allowing it to be in the background, aiming the attention toward this experience of breathing. Perhaps picking a point, the tip of the nose, the nostrils, the upper lip, the expansion and contraction of the chest, the rise and fall of the belly. Wherever you can find it's most easily or easy to connect. Rest the attention there. Sometimes it's helpful to give the mind a job. It likes tasks. So just kind of observing or monitoring, engaging with the breath in the body. Can do this by simply saying, breathing in, breathing out. I want to keep it simple. Sometimes I use the words calm and relax. It's useful to use some form of noting. So, this kind of naming of the in breath or out breath, calm, relax, breathing in, breathing out, is a noting practice. We're noting what's happening as it's happening. Another way to utilize this noting practice is that whenever we recognize that the attention has wandered off, just simply noting, thinking, planning, future, past, just one or two simple words, acknowledging the movement of the mind, where the attention has gone. And then with that sense of friendliness or kindness with the mind, aiming the attention back, breathing in, calm, breathing out, relax, and so on. again and again, recognizing whenever the attention wanders off, noting perhaps where it's gone, future or past, thinking, planning, remembering. And aim the attention back with as much friendliness and kindness as possible. Oh, the mind doing its thing. Deepening the experience of the breath, letting go of the doing of the breathing, just being with the breath. deepening into each new breath. Noting what's present in the mind. in this last few moments. The invitation is to turn this attention, this awareness toward the mind itself. Seeing what's present. Has there been a shift? So reflecting on the practice, came up for you. Not sure if it's the cold weather or if it's the time of the year. But I get these moments, I don't know, when I just don't want to say much and just want to sit and be. Part of it is that I'm talking to people all day long, like maybe many of you on Zoom or phones or whatnot, And just that sitting and reflecting and noting, for me, it's really, I think, the essence of what the Buddha is teaching and talking about. Can we just be with the mind? Can we be with the body as it is? And, course correct if we go off in some story, but try not to have a whole lot of judgment or criticism, just is. The mind thinks all by itself. Even when you're asleep, it's just thinking away, creates dreams. Sometimes when we're sleeping, the mind creates stories out of the thoughts that we didn't want to think all day. Those are fun. Anyway, I'm not going to get into dream analysis, but I'm going to read a story. This story, I just really like it. I don't know. I've been wanting to bring it in. I'll let you make of it what it is. It's a teaching. It's called The Sharpest Sword. And it's in a collection of teachings called The Teachings of the Buddha, edited by Jack Kornfield. And he basically took all of his favorite kind of quotes and stories from the from the Dhamma, from the kind of written expression and translations, and kind of pulled them all together in a book, and uses it often as his teaching guide, as I have done since the day I discovered it. And so just a little bit of reference. So this is a story about a conversation with a Deva. So the Enlightened Buddha, a Deva comes, which in many of the stories of the Buddha, there's Devas. Devas are kind of like angels, I guess you could say. They're not of this realm, but they're often observing this realm. And it's said that the Buddha and the cosmology of Buddhism could communicate with all beings in all the planes of existence, the 32 planes of existence that make up the Buddhist cosmology. And that there is this human realm, but then there's a realm that's just above the human realm, known as the Deva Realm, which is basically kind of a fortunate rebirth. And then, below the human realm, it's considered the animal realm, and so on and so forth. And there's lots of different realms. But so Devas would often come because they're actually not completely free from suffering, even though they may be in a pleasant state, pleasant realm. They're still bound to samsara. They're bound to the cycle of birth and death. And so this is the conversation. The sharpest sword. On a certain day, when the Buddha dwelt in the Jetavanya, celestial Deva came to him in the shape of a Brahmin, whose countenance was bright, whose garments were white as snow. The Deva asked the Buddha, "What is the sharpest sword? What is the deadliest poison? What is the fiercest fire? What is the darkest night?" The Buddha replied, "A word spoken in wrath is the sharpest sword. Covetousness is the deadliest poison. Hatred is the fiercest fire. Ignorance is the darkest night." The Deva then asked, "What is the greatest gain? What is the greatest loss? What armor is invulnerable? What is the best weapon?" The Buddha replied, "The greatest gain is to give to others. The greatest loss is to receive without gratitude. Patience is an invulnerable armor. Wisdom is the best weapon." The Deva asked, "Who is the most dangerous thief? What is the most precious treasure?" The Buddha replied, "Unwholesome thought is the most dangerous thief. Virtue is the most precious treasure." The Deva then asked, "What is attractive? What is unpleasant? What is the most horrible pain? What is the greatest enjoyment?" I get the feeling that the Deva is testing the Buddha. What do you know anyway? The Buddha replied, "Wholesomeness is attractive. Unwholesomeness is unpleasant. A bad conscience is the most tormenting pain. Awakening is the height of bliss." The Deva asked, "What causes ruin in the world? What breaks off friendships? What is the most violent fever? What or who is the best physician?" The Buddha replied, "Ignorance causes ruin in the world. Envy and selfishness break off friendships. Hatred is the most violent fever. The Buddha is the best physician. The Deva then continued, now I have only one doubt to be cleared away. What is it fire cannot burn, nor moisture corrode, nor wind crush down, but is able to benefit the whole world? The Buddha replied, blessing. Neither fire, nor moisture, nor wind can destroy the blessing of a good deed, and blessings benefit the world. Hearing these answers, the Deva was filled with joy. Bowed down in respect, he disappeared suddenly from the presence of the Buddha. The Sharpest Sword. So many of these, when I first read it, and actually when I first heard it, and then when I first read it, many of these stood out to me. But there's this one that I just really like. It's what is the most horrible pain? A bad conscience is the most tormenting pain. Awakening is the height of bliss. I want to kind of focus on that a little bit. I'm going to tune into that. So maybe kind of think about, or if there's any kind of thoughts about that, we can look it in the chat. I'll open up for some questions in a little bit. But I want to focus on an aspect of the teaching. We call it the precepts. And, the precepts, I don't know, they don't get that much play. And to me, it's fundamental. And it really speaks to that, just that one statement. And I often think about it as wounds of the mind. And one of the reasons why I think about this is because when I first started meditating, it was, not the very first time, because I had some pleasant experiences, which I think allowed me to want to meditate more, to want to kind of go on a retreat or do day-longs. So I began to kind of delve a little deeper into longer periods of meditation. And what I began to find is that there was a lot of, I just was tormented. One of the reasons, one of the ways that that suffering is talked about is called kilesas, or torments of mind. And these kind of terms get used a lot within Buddhism to talk about the affliction of the mind. And this, I think, can very easily cross over into the psychological realm, or why we suffer. So I'm just going to kind of move in a little bit into talking about ethics and what we call the precepts. So the Buddhist path, didn't only consist of mindfulness or concentration, leading towards insight, but also ethics, right? Beginning with the 5 precepts. In fact, the precepts constitute the first step in the path. And there's a bit of a tendency, I think, here in the West, especially just meditation or mindfulness focused, right? So other aspects of Buddhism, particularly in the what they call secular Buddhism now, or the mindfulness movement, just kind of get left out. And it's really a disservice. It's the same thing with some of the heart practices, get left out. Particularly because what is it that the precepts are trying to do? Sometimes they get kind of dismissed as like Sunday school rules, or like bound to kind of old cultural norms that no longer kind of apply to our modern society. I don't think that's true at all. As a matter of fact, that's not been my experience. I think that this misses the role of the Buddha's intention. I think that the precepts are a part of a course of therapy for the wounded mind. In particular, they are aimed at kind of curing two ailments that underlie what we may call low self-esteem or low self-worth, namely regret and denial. So when our actions kind of don't measure up to a certain standard of behavior, we either regret the action or engage in one of two kinds of denial. So one is denying that our actions did in fact happen. So this, sometimes they call this simple denial. Or two, denying that the standard of measurement are really valid. So if there's some form of denial, there's usually there's some rationalization, justification, or just some that didn't happen. So, this bumps up against our ego. We bump up against the ego, particularly when we're practicing the precepts, or we're thinking about, or we know about the precepts. So these, reactions are like wounds in the mind, particularly if we're acting in some ways that are harmful to ourselves, harmful to others. Regret, so we'll talk about regret and denial. Regret is like an open wound, tender to the touch, while denial is like hardened, twisted scar tissue around a tender spot. So regret is often, I think, connected to, remorse, and sometimes can lead to some forms of depression or not being able to move forward. So one of the ways we can see this is if we have a tendency during this noting practice, if we have a tendency to bring our attention has a tendency to move into the past and rehash kind of old stories, old wounds, bringing them up again and again. This is, some forms of regret, remorse. Sometimes it's also just like what others have done to us that we can't let go of, which causes other wounds, right? So there's different levels and different kind of ways in which wounds of the mind can be kind of described. But when the mind is wounded in these ways, it can't settle down comfortably in the present. And it often finds itself, or you might find that the mind is kind of resting on raw or exposed kind of flesh or calcified knots, right? So there's this kind of torment that can happen. And this was my experience when I started to really delve into meditation is, there was a lot of regret and remorse and, stories, actions from the past that were still active. And I didn't have the awareness at the time to really kind of see this. I only knew that I couldn't, I would be like, I can't meditate. Like, this is really hard. Every time, I sit to meditate, I'm just kind of barraged. I used to call it kind of the war zone. Like felt like I was in the middle of, kind of D-Day or something. And there was just mortars of my own kind of regrets and remorse and sadness and, fear attacking me. This is often also where, in the Buddha story, there's this attack of Mara, being basically kind of like delusion, the god of delusion in some ways, or the personification of delusion. And delusion wants to kind of keep us engaging in this, what's called samsara, which is this suffering world, the cycle of birth and death. So even, when we can force, and this is what I started to do, some really kind of, concentration practice, even when we can really force the mind to kind of stay in the present, it stays in a kind of contorted, kind of tense, kind of skittish kind of a way. That's been my experience. So the insights even that people tend to gain can be contorted or partial. They're not complete. So we can begin to kind of see, this is one of the reasons why I like the practice that we did earlier today. If you can aim the attention, the concentrated practice of kind of aiming the attention at the experience of breathing, the meditation or meditation object. And then note when the mind wanders off without judgment, but then we can begin to kind of broaden our experience. Instead of being caught in the thoughts, we can begin to see them as thoughts, as thought trains. Or even the other day I was watching Inside Out, which is a great little Disney kind of Pixar movie. And there was these aspects of the mind, and one of them was that it would be, if there's enough kind of thought or memory, that it would create a little island, and it would be the island of some aspect of our personality, as a kind of psychological way of talking about how personality develops based on experience. And so, there often there's the island of regret. There's the, there's the secrets, secrets island. There's joy, and there's, happiness, and there's, other fun and, pleasant memories as well. But for whatever reason, actually this kind of an instinctual reason, the mind and our psychological makeup tends to lean towards remembering and strengthening the unpleasant, the negative. We have a negative bias. And part of that is because we don't want to, forget things, because we don't want to repeat them, which is strange, because by denying them or by regretting them, then we're bound to repeat them quite often. So only if the mind is kind of free of these wounds or scars can it be expected to settle down comfortably and be freely kind of present, and to give rise to undistorted kind of discernment. So I was just reading something the other day by Pema Chodra, and I really liked it. I always liked Pema Chodra because I feel like she's just raw. She's just like, no, this shit's hard. Like, this is not for the faint of heart. This is for spiritual warriors, right? That's what we're doing here. And so, yes, there is a byproduct of some peace and ease, but she talked about enlightenment, right? Or becoming free, not being rising up towards the heavens, but actually, if you were to turn a mountain upside down, and that it would be about delving into the depths, and that's more like true insight. True insight is delving into the depths of our, worst memories, of the regret, the remorse, allowing the pain to, in some ways, come to the surface or to process. Because with regret and remorse, we're often not processing. So in some ways, ethical behavior, or sila, helps us to do that. And it also helps us to continue, well, I should say mindfulness meditation helps us to process, and sila, ethical behavior, helps us to, kind of have a clean slate moving forward. So sometimes sila, the word sila, which I think of as ethical or ethics, can be called like morality. It's often called like the morality group. And there's some reasons why that is. Of course, I don't like the word morality because it sounds so religious, but I'll get to that in a little bit. I just want to go over them kind of, briefly, that they basically, in the Eightfold Path, they break down into kind of three main categories, right? There is right speech or wise speech. And what does that mean? Well, it means abstinence from falsehood, right? So not telling lies, not spreading rumors, slander, so not speaking ill of others, harsh speech, meaning the way that we speak to people. And this used to mean, I think there's a puritanical, we were founded by Puritans, right? Here in America, in the States, we're founded by Puritans. And I think that there's a flavor of that even leans into all religious aspects. So harsh speech used to be about cussing as well. And, we've evolved as a species, or as a people, as a culture, for sure, that, using cussing is actually, it can be a sign of intelligence, and it's a sign of expression. It doesn't have to be like towards another being, right? Or harming in some way. And so I think that that's the way I view it. So it doesn't fall into the harsh speech category. Maybe I'm in denial. I don't know. And then also useless words. So the idea of useless words, or in the wise speech category, is kind of like speaking for the sake of speaking, or talking over people, or not being able to, just discern when is it useful to say or to, speak in some way. So idle chatter, sometimes they call that. And it was interesting when I lived in the monastery that this was something that I observed quite a lot. People that spoke, there weren't just like, the monks weren't just walking around kind of bullshitting. Some of them were actually, they were less, maybe they weren't taking their, wise speech precept as seriously as maybe others. But for the most part, people were very intentional with the way they spoke, how they spoke, when they spoke. So the next group is called, wise action, or right action. And this is the kind of, like, everyone kind of knows this one, right? It's abstinence from killing. So it's not, not killing. Sometimes the word used is ahimsa, which means non-harming. But when you really break it down, the Buddha is saying, don't kill other beings. If you kill other beings, animals, insects, whatever, there is a karmic implication that happens with this. With all of these things, there are karmic implications, hence the wounds of the mind being part of that karmic implication. So anyway, so don't kill. Stealing and or sexual misconduct. Stealing causes insecurity, causes fear. And I actually, I used to be a total klepto. Like, I would steal all the time, like things that I didn't even need, like at a store or whatever, because I got a rush from it. It was like it was a rush. And if I could get away with it, I mean, as early as like 8 years old, I was stealing stuff. There's some other, reasons why that was, but we won't get into that. But this idea of like taking on this precept of not taking what is not offered, right? So not, which is in a way allowing others to feel safe. And one of the things that I've experienced is being on meditation retreats or at meditation centers. I could leave my iPhone on my bed, even though there's 8 other people in my room, because we'd all have taken this, this vow, made this agreement that no one's going to take things that aren't theirs. And so there's a lot of different ways in which that plays out. So the next thing is called sexual misconduct, right? This is under the right action or wise action. Now, sexual misconduct, again, there's like almost a Puritan, it can feel like a Puritan kind of overlay or undertone to it, but the Buddha was actually quite clear, and he was sexist and patriarchal in some of the ways in which this was, at least he wasn't, but he implemented this in this way, where it was basically speaking to men, because men were lustful creatures, and women weren't in some way. That's the, and I think throughout almost every religion there is some implication of that, which is, just denying femininity. It's denying, feminine sexuality. There's so many, just aspects that's just wrong. But the way that sexual misconduct is kind of thought of, or at least traditionally, was, men not sleeping with not sleeping with married women, not sleeping with children, not being sexual. And I think that was basically it. It was basically like, if someone is, or if there was someone that was, like a woman lived in a home but with their parents still, then they were, you weren't to have sexual contact with them. I think some of the more modern implications are to not cause harm with our sexuality, to not be manipulative, to be, honest about intentions, to not, just kind of try to get laid and not think of the other person. And then for us as teachers, as lay practitioners, so for monks, it was kind of to abstain from all sexual energy, right? And how that plays out. But to think of sexual misconduct in a more modern sense, and as lay people, it also means that as teachers, right, myself and other teachers within the Dharma community, not sleeping with students, not having a direct, kind of, because there's a power dynamic, just kind of like, maybe the way like a professor and a college student, that would be inappropriate, or a therapist and a client, or a boss and a worker, or an admin or something, like that. There's a power differential regardless of gender, actually. Gender, I think, doesn't really play that much into it. It's just about that causing harm and understanding the disproportion around power. And of course, this has been, we've even dealt with some of it out against the stream. This has been one of the major aspects of the sila that has been had a lot of controversy around, and been challenged. And there's I think it's interesting that there's been, like, across just about every religion, there's some kind of breaking of this kind of precept or this rule, and that's happened to varying degrees. I think as spiritual practice evolves, as we as practitioners evolve, we have to come to an understanding of what this means for ourselves, and as a sangha, and as a group. So, and one of the outgrowths is that, well, there's been a lot more understanding of that, and I think we're all, hopefully, we, and I say we all, meaning those of us against the stream, are much more clear about our role and about this, the harm that can be caused around us, as we've seen with Against the Stream over the last several years, just even with accusations. So this last aspect of right action or wise action is considered abstinence from mind-altering substances. Basically, addiction is what we're talking about. Then the Buddhist perspective is kind of like, okay, if you drink too much, you're more likely to break all of the other precepts. If you're shooting heroin, you're more likely to steal or have harsh speech, or not worry so much about whether someone's, what someone else's life is worth, or, what I mean? There's a lowering of the ability to think clearly around addiction and around substances. And so for that purpose, it's abstain from all mind-altering substances. And there's a little caveat, I think a more modern is to abstain from substances that lead to heedlessness, is the way that it's kind of described, or to abstain from substances and or I would say behaviors that lead to unskillful actions. And so yeah, so there's that, right? But the Buddha was very clear, right? The more that you engage in these kinds of activities, the more wounds will be kind of acquired in the mind. And part of that is also what is called, or what's talked about, karmic implication. All right, so the last of the group is known as right livelihood or wise livelihood. So avoiding any means of livelihood that involves harm or exploitation of others. And so this looks like, this can be, sometimes it can be lawyers, or it can be like bartenders or drug dealers or cops, or, I think I think traditionally it was like butchers and brothel owners, work because there's an exploitation. So maybe it'd be people that own strip clubs, arms dealers. I don't know. I mean, there's probably a lot when you think about what work, avoiding any means of livelihood that involves harm or exploitation of others. Yeah. I think it's often one that's not talked about that often, or that it's not talked about that much. And I feel like it's useful to just reflect on what harm is being caused by my work. Am I causing harm to others, or not? Am I supporting others in some way? Am I supporting life? Most of these precepts are life affirming. So I'm going to talk for a few more minutes, and I might have to revisit this topic next week because it's rich. So this is where the 5 precepts kind of come in, right? So this idea of when you kind of wounds of the mind, they're designed to heal these wounds and scars, So healthy self-esteem comes from living up to a set of standards, that are practical, that are clear-cut, that are humane, and that are worthy of respect. And this is one of the ways in which the precepts are talked about. The 5 precepts are, formulated in such a way that they provide, a set of standards. And so, with the English word morality, really suggests a sense of kind of obligation or constraint. But in a lot of the kind of translations, or there's a mistranslation because that's the closest thing to the word sila in the English language. But this connotation probably enters more, from a theistic background, right, from Western ethics. But Buddhism, with its non-theistic framework, grounds its ethics not on the notion of obedience, right? So like you're obligated to do these things. As a matter of fact, it's always our choice to what degree we want to follow the precepts. And we never, even when we kind of chant the precepts or we take the precepts like on New Year's, it's very clear, like, if you don't feel like, abstinence is a precept you want to take on, then don't commit to it, right? And if it is something you want to take on, then commit to it, right? This kind of thing. So anyway, it's not like based on kind of obedience, but more harmony. So the idea of kind of to be harmonious. So commentaries like explain the word sila by another word, and the Buddhist word is samadhana, meaning harmony or coordination. So the observance of sila leads to harmony in several levels. It's social, psychological, karmic, and contemplative. So on the social level, the principles of sila help to establish harmonious interpersonal relationships, which I feel like is also like as a teacher and just as a practitioner, that's kind of always my goal. And I'm a bit of a curmudgeon. I kind of, it's also, I have I don't know, kind of a sarcastic and a skeptical nature. And so I feel like on a social level, like I just try not to be an asshole. Like that's kind of that's my bottom line, is like to try not to be an asshole every day when I go out into the world, and that I don't need to be one more asshole on the road, So anyway, maybe that helps you, maybe not. All right. So yeah, interpersonal relations. This is, the part of the social implications of harmonious interpersonal relations, right? So kind of, they're just acting differently in the world. So at a psychological level, Sila brings harmony to the mind. This is what we kind of started with: protection from this kind of inner splitting that causes guilt and remorse and denial, which, I think is a lot of what happens for us in, I would also, add the other hindrances in there too. The restlessness and agitation, the, excessive worry, irritability, or ill will, right? Another kind of form of agitation. Lust in the sense of kind of greed or obsessive pleasure seeking. All of these things, I think, are one of the ways that the precepts are really working to limit our suffering in these areas. And then kind of on this last kind of way, so on a karmic level, right, the observance of sila or of the precepts, ensures harmony with the cosmic law of karma, right? Hence favorable results in the course of future movement through this life. So I kind of spoke about that earlier, with the idea of kind of, if we can learn through meditative practice and following the precepts to heal the wounds of the mind, and then the precepts not causing more harm as we move forward, or at least reducing the amount of suffering caused to ourselves and to the world, thus reducing suffering. So think about all of the people that are meditating and following the precepts, and how much suffering is being reduced in the world as a result. All right, so I'm going to kind of stop there, because we're getting close to the end of time, and I wanted to see if there's any kind of thoughts or questions, reflections. Yeah. So you can feel free to raise your hand if you have a question or kind of comment in regards to what's been shared. This concept of kind of wounds of the mind and the psychological, spiritual, karmic, all these different implications. Good. So you guys will get it. Solid. Yeah, I appreciate that, actually. It's this is something that we grow into too. It's like, one of the Zen, there's a Zen quote. Well, it's not really a quote, it's a Zen teaching about that. If you think of, so in Zen Buddhism, one of the things I appreciate is that they very much kind of practice different forms of like archery or martial arts, and they're kind of bringing different aspects into and like flower arranging and tea and calligraphy, and they really kind of encompass kind of Dharma into all aspects of their life, which I think is beautiful. And they actually do a fairly good job of looking at quasi monkhood, like how someone can be a householder in the world and still take on monastic responsibilities and practices. So the story is that in Archer, so every time that we're trying to, kind of follow the precepts, like the precepts are the target or the bullseye, and we're pulling back and we're trying to hit the target, the bullseye of wise speech, or of wise sexuality, or wise kind of relationship with addiction or substances, but we don't always hit the mark. And that's part of the practice, is that we don't always hit the mark, but at least we keep working, we keep trying at that. And it's just a different way of kind of thinking about it. Instead of like right or wrong or good or bad, it's like, when I first started practicing and first heard about the precepts, there was a couple I was like, okay, like I'm willing to take that on. Like I'm willing to like not, kill mosquitoes, or things like that, or people, right? But or animals, or just all. I was willing to take that one on pretty readily. But like the wise speech and I was also pretty. It was pretty easy for me to take on the kind of not harming myself with substances as well, just because I was already clean and sober. But there were some others, I kind of like to be a shithead with my speech sometimes. And, I had some work to do around sexuality, wise sexuality, and kind of dating, and like, what did that look like? And, my livelihood was, I wasn't like a drug dealer or anything like that. So, but, I started to kind of map my life based on the precepts, because I had a strong commitment, and still do, to not cause, to avoid avoidable suffering. Basically, that's kind of the bottom line. All right. So I see a hand, and we have a few minutes. So yes, Mike D.
Hello, hi Sangha. Yeah, just really just basically wanted to say thanks for sharing the Sharpest Sword story. I haven't heard there in a while, and I really needed to. Just a word spoken in wrath is the sharpest sword.
Mm-hmm.
And lately, in my practice, just when I sit recently, I get these random thoughts of just people who have wronged me in the past, and it's kind of like a balloon floating in the sky.
Mm-hmm.
It's like it comes and it goes, but I sometimes I reminisce, and I'm like, why haven't I told them off, or why haven't I, told them how and what they did was wrong, and just go down the list X, Y, and Z, and yeah, just hearing that story kind of reminded me, like, if I was to be wrathful and you did this to me, you did that to me, it's like, what would the point of that be? What good would come out of that?
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, that's
Yeah.
all.
Mm-hmm. Thanks, Mike. Yeah, I feel like yeah, just it's just like that last metaphor I was giving about the kind of archer. We just keep taking your shots towards the bullseye. And yeah, I just try not to be an asshole. You can take that on. All right, Karen, and then that'll be the last one for today.
I guess I would build on what Mike was talking about, because a big issue in my life is what other people have done to me that I objected to. And being able to let go of that, which I'm not good at it at all. So that's very similar to what he was talking about. And I get myself into this position of saying, well, I've been good. Why did those bad things happen? And I know that Buddhist story about the mustard seeds.
Mhm.
So, okay, everybody, has shitty things happen. And I'm still into the why me thing. It's so, it's a thing.
Yeah, I mean, it is a thing. Thank you for sharing that, and Mike as well. I mean, I think that's the humanistic quality is that, and that's what the Buddha means by samsara. Like the idea is that there's struggle in this realm, and we don't always know why. And sometimes it has to do with karma, and sometimes it doesn't. Sometimes it doesn't have anything to do with karmic implications, and trying to figure it out. But actually, more in line with, can we heal those wounds moving forward? And I find that compassion practice and forgiveness practice are very useful, and also just seeing it, like you both are talking about. So thank you for your time and attention, for the questions, comments, Mike, for putting up the against the stream donations. Feel free to donate to us. We need all the support we can. This is kind of how we keep the doors open. I don't ask for any kind of financial support or anything like that. But really, it's just about keeping the rent, And hopefully, we'll be back in person soon. So you can go to againstthestream.com, or you can click on the link. Also, on Venmo, it's Against the Stream Meditation. You can always Venmo us as well. So we do this work, not only for ourselves, but for all beings, right? So that's kind of the theme of today. So just to kind of share the merit is what they call it, sharing the merit of all the goodness of our practice. So first of all, just acknowledge yourself. You showed up for this meditation. You did the best you could to meditate through the 30 minutes, and then listening to the Dharma for the betterment of all beings. May all beings be happy. May all beings be free. May we all do what needs to be done to free ourselves from suffering.